Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's author live chat brought to you by NetGalley, BookTrib, and Merrill Moss Media. Joining us today is New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and #1 Amazon bestselling author of the Tracy Crosswhite series, Robert Dugoni. Robert has also written the David Sloan series. He is a 2015 International Thriller Writers finalist for Thriller of the Year, as well as the 2015 winner of the Nancy Pearl Award for Fiction. Today, Robert's third book in the Tracy Crosswhite series, In the Clearing, was released. Happy Pub Day, Robert. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for very much. Thanks for having me. I tell you, it never gets old.
See, all that praise and keep it coming, right?
There, there goes the cat across
Oh,
my
we've got
screen,
cats,
and
we've got
the dog's
dogs,
not far
so
behind her.
we're all set. The gang's all here. So let's talk first about In the Clearing. What can readers kind of expect from book three in the Tracy Crosswhite series?
Um, I kind of went back to the original series. The idea of Tracy getting involved in a case that involves a young woman that dies 40 years ago, and everyone seems to believe that she died of it was a suicide brought on by a bad relationship. And she's asked by a colleague of hers that she meets in a book called The Academy. She's asked by that colleague of hers to look into this, and she does. And of course, when she begins to look into it, she begins to find a lot of very dark and deep secrets in a very small town in Washington State.
Ooh, very interesting. Okay. So is this book in any way different in the series from any of the other books? Or like you said, you kind of went back to the beginning with this book. What is it about this book that sets it apart?
You know, readers who have read it already and the reviews that are being posted, it's a very personal book for Tracy, and readers have found it to be very personal. It's always tragic when you lose a young person, and in this instance, the person that dies is a very adept 17-year-old high school student who also is Native American, which I wanted to kind of capture down in that area in southern Washington State. And she's very accomplished, and she has her whole life ahead of her, and she has everything to live for. And so for a young person like that to die, I think is very tragic, and I think that's what people are connecting to.
Right.
The forensics in this case are also very elaborate. I've been very lucky to have a couple of different individuals that have helped me, and I think people have found that to be very interesting, the way that police work and the different techniques and things that are used. And the other thing is just the way that a river flows. She's alleged to have drowned, thrown herself into a river. And I was blessed to find a guy that really understood the way rivers work. He does whitewater rafting and guides, and he was very helpful to me with water flows and what can happen as a result of those flows. So uh, it's a very police oriented novel. There's a lot of police procedure in it, and people seem to find that very interesting.
That's awesome. So My Sister's Grave, which was the first one, it was just a smash hit on Amazon, over 9,000 reviews with a 4.5-star rating. Were you expecting that kind of response originally? Were you hoping for it, or were you just like blown away?
I think every author is hoping
Yeah.
for it. To say that we're expecting it, boy, I would never say that. I will say that I thought it was a good book. I thought it was a good book. I was very pleased with how the book came out. I was very happy with the way that it came about. My agent is one of my harshest critics, which is what you want,
Absolutely.
and she's I remember when she read My Sister's Grave, she was calling me, and as she was going through it, saying, "Oh my God, oh my God," and she cried on several occasions. And I think it's a very hard book for anybody that has a sibling, particularly a sister, um, to read and to not be emotionally moved by it. So I was very pleased with it. I was hopeful that that everybody out there would be pleased with it, and I was very blessed to have a publisher that knew how to get it out into the marketplace, get it out to, a large number of people, and as a result of that, a lot of people read it and a lot of people really enjoyed it. So I feel very blessed.
Definitely. Did you know at the end of that book you wanted this to be a series, or was kind of the overwhelming response what pushed you to continue it?
No, I knew I wanted it to be a series, and at the time, my editor, Alan Turkis, he actually pulled a subplot out of that book. He said that he felt that the book was strong enough without it, and that it could be distracting.
Oh,
And he said, I also think it would make a great second novel, and that became Her Final Breath.
oh, very interesting. Now, there's also two short stories available. Is there a reading order to the Academy and Third Watch, or can you read them? One or the other doesn't matter.
You can kind of read them. What I did was My Sister's Grave opens with Tracy Crosswhite being a homicide detective, and then of course we go back in time when she gets the phone call saying that they found a body in the hills above Cedar Grove. Um, and so what I had kind of done for myself was begin to put together the story of how did Tracy go from being a high school chemistry teacher to being a homicide detective. And of course what that meant was going through the police academy and serving as a patrol officer. And I had spoken to several officers about that transition, about what they go through. And there was a couple of really fascinating stories that they told me about being female officers at the academy and what that was like. And so I used those and to write those stories. And my agent just really loved them. And so we started talking with Amazon about them and giving away the first one for free to just kind of get people interested in the series.
Okay, excellent. Are there any more books planned? Can you talk about that, or are you just kind of still taking
Well,
it
I
easy?
mean, I can talk about it, but then I'd have to
All
kill you,
right.
right? So no.
Then it'd be its own book.
No, absolutely, I can talk about it. In fact, I finished the fourth book already. The fourth book has already been developmentally edited. I'm very excited about it. My publishers are excited about it. My agents are excited about it. It's another story of, it opens with police officers finding a woman's body in a crab pot.
Oh,
And so the obvious questions are, can they identify her? Do we know who she is? Where, and then from who is she? It's of course, how did she get there? And so I kind of build on that. And it's probably, of all the novels I've written, it's probably the one novel that really emphasizes difficult police work. Just the actual digging and asking questions and following through and all those kind of things. It was also very difficult for me because I write part of the book in first person through the victim, who is a 22-year-old young woman. And of course, I'm not. And so that was difficult. And I had to rely on a lot of people to read it, what I had written, and make sure that I got that right.
okay, very interesting. Well, that's exciting. Something to look forward to. Can you talk a little bit maybe about your background and how did you ultimately decide you knew this is what you wanted to do? You were going to be a writer.
It sounds very trite, but I knew in the seventh grade. It's what I was good at. All my brothers and sisters were great at sciences and math and all those things, but they couldn't write a lick. I mean, they couldn't write to save their lives. And I could always write. I give credit to my mother. When I was young, she was constantly handing me books to read. She was an English teacher at the time, and she stopped to have kids. I'm one of 10
Oh
kids,
my
so
goodness.
there wasn't a lot of free
Yeah.
time, yeah, for her. But she always had this love of books, and I kind of fell into that same love. I remember reading The Count of Monte Cristo when I was just a little guy at the time, and all those great stories out there of mice and men and the Lord of the Rings. And she would just keep giving me all these books. And so In the seventh grade, we had to do a paper on slavery, and we also had to act it out. And I took the part of a slave, an abolitionist, and got up in front of my seventh grade class and performed. And I knew at that moment that's really what I wanted to do. And everything I kind of did after that sort of followed in those footsteps of career in writing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as a thriller writer, is there anything that you look to put in every book, maybe staples that to you just kind of make it like a slam dunk um, as a thriller? Uh, Anything that you set out to specifically include?
No, there's
No.
really not. In fact, my books probably are more mysteries than they are
Okay.
thrillers. Traditional thrillers, we usually know who the killer is right away. And the question is, will that killer be brought to justice? In mysteries, a lot of times they have to figure out who the killer is before they can bring the killer to justice. And even when I was writing, early on the David Sloan series, the traditional legal thrillers, I a lot of times hid that answer. Who is it? Because to me, those are the books I like. Those are the books that were really appealing to me. When I was young and my dad was alive, we'd watch movies together. And my dad was one of those guys who would figure out who the killer was. And so during the whole second half of the movie, he'd be looking at me, going, do you get it? Have you figured it out yet? Do you know who it is? And I think I probably gravitate more toward those mystery slash thrillers than I do
Okay.
toward your more traditional thrillers, where we know who the killer is, and the question is simply, will we be able to stop him or
Right.
her?
Is there anything that kind of sticks out in your head, maybe some helpful or good advice to those authors just getting started and maybe they're just getting started writing their mystery or thriller? Things maybe you wish you had known when you were getting started?
Yeah, one is know the craft. I always wrote. I wrote for the LA Times. I wrote all through college, and I could write, but writing a novel there's a format to it, if you will. There's a structure to it, and a lot of people I think kind of get into that mindset of I'm an artist
Right.
and I don't want to have any structure whatsoever. And what I always tell people when I teach it, I teach a lot now all over the country, is Michelangelo was actually a really, really accomplished student of anatomy and physics and all those things, so that he didn't just start pounding on a rock and create the David.
Right.
He understood anatomy and how people's bodies were put together and what was connected to what, and et cetera, et cetera. And I sat down, I got out of practicing law and moved to Seattle, and I sat down and I'm just going to start writing my novel. And I think, I don't know how long after the fact, I realized I really didn't know what I was doing. And so I went back and I got the books on the craft, and I talked to people that were involved in the craft, what they were reading, what they were doing. Christopher Vogler's book, The Writer's Journey, Saul Stein's book on writing, all those things. And I began to study them, and I began to give myself sort of a master's class in novel writing. And, lo and behold, I started having some
Yeah,
success.
absolutely. So you've also written the David Sloan series that you mentioned before. If you talk a little bit about that series, maybe how it's a little different than the Tracy series and all of that.
Sure. David Sloan's a lawyer, and he was inspired when I was a young person. When I was at Stanford University, I took some time off, part of a program where I could go into a law firm and clerk and work for a lawyer. And David Sloan was inspired by an attorney in a San Francisco firm who, from my perspective, in watching the guy, it was almost like he couldn't lose, and he was that good. And I thought to myself, what if an attorney really had that ability? I mean, what dilemmas would it create for him or her? And so I started exploring that idea. In the five novels that are in the David Sloan series, he's not in the courtroom a tremendous amount in each of them. There's two or three where he's really in the courtroom quite a bit, but the other he uses those legal skills to sort of solve the problems that he's faced with. And it's a lot like the Tracy Crosswhite series in that what I try to do is start with something that appears to be one thing and just gets bigger and
Right.
bigger and bigger. until we get to the point where there goes the cat again. Until we get to that point again where um, it's so large that it seems almost too big for the person who's handling
Yeah,
it.
exactly. Interesting. So you've also written with Joseph Hildorfer. I think maybe I'm pronouncing that correctly. You wrote this.
We are,
Okay.
yes.
You wrote this Cyanide Canary together, and it was a Washington Post Best Book of the Year selection. How did you come together and decide to kind of collaborate?
Um, Actually, a funny story. Uh, I had, it was early in my career. It was the first book I ever wrote, and before I had ever met Joe, I was going through the same rejection that every writer goes through. I mean, I was, getting a lot of rejection letters and just having a lot of difficulty getting started. And I actually went home one Friday afternoon, very disheartened. Kind of got my last rejection letter on a proposal that I had out. I started tearing up the backyard. I started tearing up the lawn, and I started putting in a patio for reasons I won't bore you
Okay.
with. But after 2.5 days of doing this on my own, railroad ties and sand and brick and all, I didn't have any help whatsoever. I had finished this masterpiece of a patio, and I was exhausted. And my wife came home and said, "We need to go to a birthday party for your son, my son Joe, who was 6 at the time." And I always tell people now, I say there was no way I was going, and I told her there was no way I was going, and there was nothing that was going to make me go. And right after I said that, I did what every married man knows I did. I marched up the stairs, took a shower, and I went to the
Yep.
party. And I met Joe Hildorfer there.
Oh,
And Joe and I started talking, and I remember very distinctly him saying to me, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm trying to write books." And he thought it was just the coolest thing in the world, and he was a huge reader. And I asked him what he did, and he said, I'm an EPA agent for the Environmental Protection Agency." And I said, "God, that sounds like a terrific job." And he said, "No, it's a chicken shit organization. You won't want to be a part of it." I just immediately liked the guy. And he called me the next day and said, "I'd like to talk to you, and can you come up and see me?" And I did, and started telling me this incredible story, and it became the Cyanide Canary, which was a story of a young man in Idaho who's put into a tank, goes into a tank to clean it out, and he's not told that the tank used to be used in a cyanide leaching system, and it's just tragic what happened to him. So, and it was, it was everything. It was right up my alley. It was law. It was journalism. I conducted, dozens and dozens of interviews. I became, good friends with the head of the Environmental Protection Agency at that time, a guy named David Ullman. I'm very proud of that book because it was a tremendous amount of work, and to try to get it accurate. And I think at one point we had somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,000 footnotes to support what we did. And it was, it opened doors for me, which was
yeah,
great.
absolutely. So interesting. Are there any future plans for you guys to work together or any other collaborations in the works, or do you kind of just do your own thing?
Yeah, Joe's enjoying retired life. He's living in Hawaii.
Oh, really enjoying it.
And I don't know if he has any desire, to do another book or not. I always tell people I'm always interested in doing a nonfiction book. I'm always interested in trying to find that right fit. But that's sort of the key, is finding that right fit. You need to find a story out there that people have kind of heard of, but it hasn't been done so much that you can't ever, not that it hasn't been done before. And so, every once in a while I'll go back to looking at stories that are out there, or people will suggest them to me, and I'll suggest them to my agent, uh, and it's just not quite the right fit. The other thing that's really interesting now with the success of My Sister's Grave is people become sort of accustomed to what you write and how you write it. And I mean, I've actually had people that have gone and read the Cyanide Canary, and even though predominantly most people really enjoy it, there are people out there who will say, this is not like his other books. Well, of course not. It's nonfiction.
Right,
It's
exactly.
different, but they're expecting, they have expectations of a Robert Dugoni book now. which I never thought that would exist, and it's a wonderful thing to be a part of. But it does limit you a little bit
Yeah,
in what you can do.
absolutely. What about other genres? I mean, nonfiction, obviously, but is there anything else in fiction that you're interested in writing in?
Well, again, the difficulty, if you will be if I've established an audience now, and people expect a certain type of book. I have written a book, a more literary novel. I don't consider myself literary. I always tell people I'm never going to win a Pulitzer Prize. It's never going to happen, and I'm fine with that. But I did write another book that I hope someday we'll see because it's a very personal book in a lot of respects, and it's a book that I sort of wrote in honor of my mom, and I'd like for her to read it someday. And there's a lot of people who have read it that are they find it's very appealing to them. Um, I grew up, and even to this day, I still read a lot of literary novels. I just read Kristen Hanna's book, The Nightingale.
Oh,
I've read All the Light We Cannot See. I read a lot of literary novels. I also listen to a tremendous number of nonfiction books. The Destiny of the Republic. There's a book about the hunt to get to Antarctica, and I think I just find those fascinating, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for the people that do the research on those books, because it's a lot. So
yeah.
I'm either reading a novel or I'm listening to a book on tape, but I do read. I do read in all genres, including literary. I'm reading Bill Lasser's book now, The Accounting, which is a fabulous book. I mean, it's a terrific book. I just got through listening to a book, The Life We Bury, and it was great. So I really just appreciate writing and good writing, and there are times I'm reading a book and I think to myself, oh my God, I could never write that well. And that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely. So speaking of, we're talking about things to include and what to put in your books. You and author Stephen James, you teach a novel writing course
We
together. Can you
do.
talk a little about that and how people can sign up?
Yeah, sure. It was really more Stephen's baby. He started a novel writing. It's called the Novel Writing Intensive. So it's just www.thenovelwritingintensive.com. And he started it, and he saw me teach back in Boston, and came up to me afterwards and asked me if I would be interested. And it's a really unique program because we only take 10 to 12 students maximum.
Oh,
And then each of us takes 5 or 6 manuscripts, the first 50 pages, and we read those 50 pages, and then we critique them, and we go through them, and all the things that work and all the things that don't work. And then when we get together in our classroom setting, it's very intense. I mean, we start Thursday at noon, and we don't finish until Sunday at noon, and you're up till 8, 9 o'clock every night. And it's a lot of classroom instruction. It's a lot of critiquing of manuscripts and using those manuscripts as examples of some of the things we're trying to teach. And then it's other things. It's movies, watching portions of movies and why they work and why they don't work. And it's a tremendous amount of fun. It's really a good time. I've met just an incredible number of really talented people, and we've been fortunate to have several of them get published. And that's always feels really good. So we teach all over the country. We teach out on Whidbey Island. We're going to be teaching in Dallas in October.
okay.
We're going to be teaching in Tennessee in March the following year. So we have found it's very successful. There's a lot of people that want to enroll,
Yeah.
and so we've just kind of been adding more and more classes to try to accommodate people.
And just so everyone's clear, it's not just a thriller writing. This is all novels, right?
Right. Good writing is good writing, and that's what I was kind of getting at earlier about genre. I don't limit myself to one genre or another because I can really appreciate good writing, and good books work when they are put together pretty much a lot of times in the same way. Literary novels are put together in the same way as novels, but they're different techniques. They're slower paced. They use more language to describe things and things, but generally the story is told in the same way.
Right. If you had to tell people who are thinking about signing up, if you had to tell them like one thing to prep them for this course, what would you want them to take away to know about it?
Read a lot, read and watch a lot of movies and ask yourself, why does this work? I mean, why am I enjoying this? Why am I not enjoying this? You know, what is it that it's not coming through to me? And not just it doesn't appeal to you because, you know, of, well, I'm a guy and it's about a woman. No, but I mean, what are the techniques involved in it that sort of really work? We use a lot of book examples and a lot of movie examples, and we send that out ahead of time to our class, and we say these are the movies and the books that you should be familiar with, because if you are, you'll get more out of the class.
Yeah.
But there's no substitute. There's no substitute for reading. There isn't. I mean, just being able to read a lot of books and find out what works, it can be its own classroom, really.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to take before we are nearing the end, but before we do end and wrap up, I want to take some viewer questions. So jump right in. Callie wants to know, do you have a favorite TV series right
Um, I uh, I am a big. I love to watch the reality TV. I love Wicked Tuna. I love the Crab series. But then I also love sitcoms. There's a lot of sitcoms I love. I've gotten into True Detective, which is not a sitcom, obviously, but
now?
I'm really enjoying True Detective. I'm trying to get into Game of Thrones. I'm behind my wife and my son, so I'm trying to get into that. But you know, I watch a wide variety of programs and enjoy them.
Okay. What about Jocelyn is asking, as a best-selling author, do you ever feel pressure to constantly outdo yourself? If so, how do you deal with that
Every book. I mean, every book. You want every book to be better than the last book. I mean, it's just human nature. And what you have to do is you have to just say, I'm going to write the best book I can. And if some people find it better than the last book, great. If some people don't, there's really nothing you can do. But that is definitely it's definitely hangs over every author's head is what am I doing next and how can I make it great?
pressure? Yeah, definitely. What about how you mentioned law briefly before, but Callie's asking, how did it help you with your writing?
Well, when I started, I was writing you know, legal thrillers with a lawyer as the lead. But really, what it taught me is a lot of other things. I mean, it taught me how to work. I mean, it taught me how to put my butt in a chair and actually go to work. It taught me how to do research, which I need. It taught me not to be afraid to call people and ask them about their jobs and how they do it and what they do. And then it taught me a certain form of writing, of getting to the point, of not belaboring things. Um, so I think in many respects, not just being a lawyer, but having gone through the process of becoming a lawyer and beginning to think like a lawyer has helped me begin to put together novels in a way that so far people have found enjoyable.
Absolutely. Um, John Dunbar is asking, what is inspiration for your characters?
Um, John Dunbar is actually the mayor of a city in California, and
Wow,
he's a good
welcome.
friend.
Thanks for watching.
Yeah, John is a great. He's a great guy. I put a lot of people that I know in my books, and John is actually a character
Ah,
he's the dead body in the Jurymaster, so it's sort of like the Big Chill. And then one of our very good friends, Tom Moya, is the police inspector in that book. Yeah, so I ended up putting both of them into that novel, getting permission, using their names. Um, you know, so a lot of times inspiration comes from people I know, you know, and a lot of times inspiration comes from people I read about, and a lot of times they just crafted out of thin air.
yeah, absolutely. What is the most challenging thing about being an author? Kate is
You know, I think it's finding the time to do your job, because you know you would think we have a lot of free time, But I always tell people that I have a sign on my writing door, on the inside of my writing door. I used to keep there, and it's around here somewhere, and it says "Do not disturb." But I would put it on the inside, not on the outside, because really the compulsion to get up and find something else to do.
Right.
I don't bring my phone into my when I'm writing. I try not to have my email on when I'm writing. You really have to sort of immerse yourself into the story. Where are you and what are you doing? Because it's easy to find excuses not to write. And what writers need to do is they need to find that time to write.
Mm, okay, very interesting. And Brooke is asking, if you could have dinner with one of your characters, who would you choose, why, and what are you having for dinner?
Um, uh, if I could have dinner with one of my characters, hmm, that's a tough one. Oh, I know who. I would have dinner with Vic Fazio, Foz from the jury, from all of the Tracy Crosswhite novels,
Okay.
and I would do it because he's a cook. He's an Italian cook,
Ooh.
so I know I would get it. I know I would get a great meal, and I'm Italian and I love Italian food, so I'm sure we'd have saltimbocca and some lasagna or maybe a little gnocchi and a little
Her,
red wine,
that sounds
the whole
yummy.
bit.
So what's upcoming for you? Do you have any events where people can come find you or get their books signed? What do you have kind of coming
Yeah.
soon?
Yeah, tomorrow night I'm going to be at the Tin Room in Burien. The Tin Room is a bar and restaurant that I've included in a lot of my novels, both the David Sloan novels and the Tracy Crosswhite novels. I'm going to be there at 4:30 Pacific time. And then I get invited to do a lot of conferences. I do a lot of conferences out here on the West Coast, but I just got invited to the Virginia conference. I'm hoping I'm going to be able to make it out there. The Mid-Atlantic Conference in Wisconsin. I really enjoy conferences because it gives me a chance to meet a large group of people, and
Right.
and to me that's what I find the most fascinating. So. I'm not going to be going out on a traditional book tour. Oops, I lost you there.
I'm still
Um,
here.
I'm not. There we go. I'm not going to be going out on a traditional book tour.
Okay.
I've done that in the past and those things. But I'll be hitting a lot of the conferences and like I said, having fun.
Excellent. Well, again, congratulations on Pub Day. In the Clearing is out
Thank you.
today. And go grab it, Amazon. Download, order, whatever you want to do to get it, but definitely check it out. Thank you so much, Robert. We really appreciate having you today.
Thanks very much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Oh, good. Same on our end. Everyone, have a great day. Thank you.